With a helicopter circling overhead, heavily armed agents stormed an apartment building. Inside, they went door to door in what Border Patrol describes as a targeted operation.
They went through that structure, which is a very large structure. You can see it's 5 stories. They went through that structure a lot quicker than I thought, and several apprehensions. It looks like we have a couple of potential targets that we briefed earlier today that we were after.
Chicago's South Shore. Normally, it's a neighborhood full of life, with families, businesses, and culture thriving along the lakefront. But this week, that familiar rhythm was shattered when federal agents stormed in during the night. In one of the most dramatic immigration enforcement actions the city has seen in years, 37 people were taken into custody during a coordinated ICE and Department of Homeland Security operation. Officials say the targets of this raid were members of the Venezuelan gang known as Tren de Aragua, a criminal organization that has expanded across Latin America and, according to federal sources, now has a presence in U.S. cities, including Chicago. But as always, there are two sides to the story. Federal officials frame this as a major victory against organized crime. Community members, however, tell a darker tale. Doors kicked down, families terrified, and immigrant neighborhoods left shaken to their core. This is the story of the South Shore raid, a story of law enforcement power, community fear, and the growing tension between immigration enforcement and civil rights in Chicago. The night of the raid, just before dawn, witnesses say they saw unmarked vans and armored vehicles quietly rolling into South Shore. Streets that are usually quiet in those early hours suddenly came alive with the sight of heavily armed agents. Neighbors describe agents in tactical gear, carrying rifles, moving in coordinated formation as they approached residential buildings. One local resident recalled, "I thought it was a terrorist attack. The sound of battering rams, people screaming, children crying. We didn't know what was happening until later." By sunrise, the neighborhood was in chaos. 37 individuals were in custody, and ICE declared the raid a success. The targets: Tren de Aragua. According to ICE and DHS officials, the raid was not random. They say they were specifically targeting members of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan criminal organization notorious for its violence, extortion, and human trafficking. The gang was born inside Venezuelan prisons but has since spread across Colombia, Chile, Peru, and now allegedly the United States. Law enforcement claims that Tren de Aragua members are infiltrating migrant communities, using immigration pathways to establish operations. By linking the South Shore raid to this gang, officials are trying to frame the arrests not just as immigration enforcement, but as a direct strike against international organized crime, community shock, and fear. But for the families in South Shore, the raid felt like an invasion. Neighbors watched as doors were kicked in. Children were seen crying on sidewalks as their parents were handcuffed. Some say that not everyone arrested was part of a gang, and that innocent people may have been caught in the sweep. Activists point out that raids like this spread fear far beyond the targets. Even immigrants with legal status now feel unsafe. One activist said, "When ICE storms into a neighborhood like this, everyone is a suspect. Families are traumatized, communities are destabilized." The numbers federal authorities claim that out of the 37 detained, the majority had ties to Tren de Aragua, but they have not yet released the full list of charges. Critics argue that ICE often exaggerates gang affiliations to justify large-scale raids. They warn that labeling immigrants as gang members without due process is a tactic that stokes fear and justifies extreme measures. The political fallout. This raid comes at a politically sensitive time. Chicago is already grappling with debates over immigration, sanctuary city policies, and the federal presence of ICE and Border Patrol. Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago's mayor have both criticized heavy-handed enforcement in the past. Now, the South Shore raid will almost certainly fuel more debate. Are these actions keeping Chicago safe, or are they terrorizing immigrant neighborhoods? Human stories behind the numbers are human lives. One mother described how her husband was taken during the raid. They came in the middle of the night. "My kids were screaming. They didn't even let him say goodbye." Another witness said, "People are scared to leave their homes. Even those who have nothing to hide are afraid. We don't know who will be next." These are the voices that often get lost in official press releases, but they reveal the real cost of immigration enforcement on families and communities. The bigger picture. The Southshore raid may be the largest ICE operation in Chicago this year, but it's not an isolated event. Across the country, similar raids are being carried out under the justification of fighting gangs and organized crime, but critics say this strategy uses fear to control immigrant populations. They argue that raids destabilize communities, break trust with local police, and create an atmosphere where immigrants are too afraid to report crimes or cooperate with authorities. The debate boils down to this: is the goal really to make Chicago safer, or to make immigrants feel like outsiders in their own city? Closing the Southshore raid has left a deep mark on Chicago. 37 people are in custody. Families are separated. A neighborhood is shaken. ICE calls it a victory against gangs. Residents call it a violation of trust and humanity. And now, Chicago must wrestle with the bigger question: what kind of city do we want to be? A city that welcomes immigrants and protects families? Or a city where fear and federal power dominate the streets? For now, Southshore is living with the aftermath. And the rest of Chicago is watching closely, because this is not just about one raid. It's about the future of immigration enforcement in America's cities.